At about 12:40 on the afternoon of January 15, 1919, people near Boston's waterfront heard a low rumble coming from an enormous steel tank. Then came a series of sharp cracks. Witnesses compared the sound to machine gun fire, as rivets and steel plates began to fail. Seconds later, roughly 2.3 million gallons of molasses were moving through the north end. Not as slow kitchen syrup, as a dense industrial flood, powerful enough to break buildings, overturn vehicles, and kill anyone it trapped. The disaster would become known as the Great Molasses Flood. Its name makes it sound almost comedic, like the kind of historical accident remembered because its main ingredient seems impossible. But almost any substance becomes dangerous when millions of gallons of it are suddenly released. The stranger question was how that much weight had been allowed to stand beside a crowded neighborhood in the first place. The tank stood on Commercial Street beside Boston Harbor, near an elevated railway, a city paving yard, a firehouse, freight sheds, homes, and a playground. It was about 50 feet tall and 90 feet across, with a capacity of roughly 2.5 million gallons. In a neighborhood of brick buildings and narrow streets, it rose above the waterfront like an industrial silo. And the north end was not simply an industrial zone. It was one of Boston's most densely populated immigrant districts. Italian families lived close to Irish laborers, teamsters, longshoremen, city workers, and businesses serving the port. Children passed the tank on their way home for lunch. Workers ate nearby. Families lived within reach of its shadow. Molasses was not being stored there primarily as food. It was a raw material for producing industrial alcohol, which had civilian uses and became especially valuable during the First World War. The Purity Distilling Company built the Commercial Street tank in late 1915 to receive molasses arriving by sea and supply its distilling operation in Cambridge. United States Industrial Alcohol later controlled Purity and the tank. Construction moved quickly. The enormous riveted vessel was erected during the winter, and it was never subjected to a full water test before entering service. Accounts of the initial test describe only about 6 inches of water inside a structure designed to hold liquid nearly 50 feet deep. A shipment was waiting. The tank went into use. And when molasses entered it, the warning signs became visible. Its seams leaked. Workers recaulked parts of the structure, but the leakage continued. Neighborhood children were later reported collecting dripping molasses in cans. People described hearing the tank groan and vibrate as its contents rose. Eventually, the structure was painted a dark brown. Popular versions of the story often say the color was deliberately chosen to hide the leaking molasses. The repainting and continuing leaks are well documented in later testimony and histories. The precise motive for the color is harder to establish, but the more important fact requires no speculation. The tank leaked. People knew it leaked, and leakage gradually became something the neighborhood lived with, rather than a reason to empty the structure and prove that it was safe. By January 1919, the tank had been repeatedly filled and emptied. A modern structural review found that it had been filled 29 times, but only 4 times to near its maximum capacity. Then, 2 days before the disaster, another shipment brought the level close to full. The weather had also changed sharply. Boston had recently been bitterly cold. By January 15th, the temperature had climbed to around 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Warmer molasses from the latest delivery had not fully cooled inside the tank. Fermentation may have produced additional gas. Temperature changes may have affected internal pressure. Those factors would become important in later attempts to explain the collapse, but they could not explain away the steel surrounding the molasses. Shortly after noon, the shell ruptured. The roof and walls separated. Heavy steel plates tore away from the tank. One large fragment struck supports beneath the elevated railway. Then the contents moved outward. The surge smashed into the nearby firehouse, tore through freight structures, scattered wagons and trucks, and pushed buildings from their foundations. Later accounts would describe a wall of molasses 15 or even 25 feet high, traveling at 35 miles per hour. Those numbers were not produced by instruments waiting on Commercial Street. Witness descriptions, newspaper reports, and later reconstructions do not all agree. Modern experiments, nevertheless, confirm the essential point. The initial surge could move quickly. One research model placed its speed closer to 11 miles per hour. At close range, that was still far too fast to simply step out of the way. The reason was scale. Millions of gallons had been stored high above street level. When the steel released that weight, gravity drove the first mass outward. Then the same material became a different kind of danger. As the molasses spread across the cold streets and cooled, it thickened. What had arrived with enormous force became exhausting to move through. And people were inside it. 10-year-old Pasquale Iantosca had been gathering firewood near the tank while home from school for lunch. 10-year-old Maria D'Estasio was also returning home and collecting wood nearby. Both were killed. At the North End paving yard, city workers were eating their midday meal when the flood reached them. Several never had time to escape. The Cloherty family home was dragged into wreckage beneath the elevated structure. 65-year-old Bridget Cloherty died there. At Engine 31, firefighters were buried when part of their station collapsed. Rescuers spent hours cutting through timber, furnishings, and twisted debris. Firefighter George Lay was trapped beneath the wreckage. He left behind a wife and 3 children. Cadets from the nearby Massachusetts Nautical School training ship were among the first organized rescuers to reach the area. Police officers, firefighters, Red Cross workers, soldiers, sailors, medical personnel, and civilians joined them. They pulled people from molasses mixed with broken timber, metal, paving stones, and freight. As the temperature fell, the substance became even harder to work through. Salt water from the harbor eventually proved more useful than ordinary fresh water for breaking down the residue. 21 people died. Some died immediately. Others survived the initial flood but died later. About 150 people were injured. Homes, municipal facilities, railway structures, and businesses were damaged or destroyed. Cleanup crews worked for weeks. Molasses traveled far beyond the disaster zone on shoes, clothing, equipment, and vehicles. But cleaning the streets did not answer the central question. Why had the tank failed? More than 100 claims against United States Industrial Alcohol were eventually consolidated into a massive civil proceeding. The company offered an explanation that moved responsibility away from the structure: sabotage. It argued that an outside explosion, possibly planted by anarchists, had destroyed the tank. That theory did not appear in a vacuum. The United States had experienced bombings, labor conflict, wartime sabotage fears, and growing panic over political radicalism. Boston's Italian community included anarchist activists, while anti-Italian prejudice made the wider neighborhood especially vulnerable to suspicion. The company had also produced material connected to wartime munitions. To people living in that political climate, sabotage was imaginable. For United States Industrial Alcohol, it was also extremely useful. If an attacker had destroyed a sound tank, then the company that built and operated it was not responsible for the collapse. The victims had to establish something very different. They had to prove that the tank itself had been dangerous. And by then, the tank no longer existed. Court-appointed auditor Hugh W. Ogden spent years hearing testimony from witnesses, engineers, metallurgists, and competing experts. Investigators examined surviving steel, rivets, construction practices, the manhole area, and alleged signs of an explosion. The record eventually grew to more than 20,000 pages. Ogden rejected the sabotage theory. He found United States Industrial Alcohol responsible. The important conclusion was not that investigators could reconstruct every microscopic instant of the rupture. It was that the tank had been dangerously inadequate for the pressure it was expected to contain. Later engineering analysis has helped explain why. Parts of the steel shell and its riveted joints operated with safety margins below recommended practice, even by standards available at the time. Rivet holes and openings in the structure created areas where stress could concentrate. The steel itself was also more vulnerable to brittle fracture in cold conditions than engineers designing such a structure would want today. Modern analysis suggests that a crack may have begun near one of these highly stressed points and then raced through the weakened steel. Fermentation may have increased pressure. Temperature changes may have contributed. Repeated heavy fills may have helped existing damage grow. But none of those possibilities changes the larger engineering problem. A tank holding millions of gallons beside homes and workplaces should not have depended on calm weather, quiet molasses, and luck to remain standing. In 1925, Ogden's findings led to damages against the company. The case became an important example of a corporation being held responsible for the technical safety of a structure it placed beside the public. But even here, the popular version often moves too quickly. The Great Molasses Flood did not invent professional engineering licensure. The first American engineering licensure law had already appeared in Wyoming in 1907. Nor did one disaster suddenly create every modern building code. Boston and other jurisdictions were already changing how large structures were reviewed, and engineering regulation developed gradually across the United States. The flood contributed to something broader, an expanding expectation that large structures should be calculated, reviewed, inspected, and traceable to qualified people, and that a company controlling the technical information behind a structure could still be held responsible when that structure failed. The Great Molasses Flood survives in popular memory because the material makes the disaster sound ridiculous. Molasses is the detail that earns the story a second look. But the tank could have held oil, water, or another industrial commodity, and the central problem would remain. A massive structure stood beside homes and workplaces. It leaked. It groaned. It had never been fully tested. And it was filled again. The strangest part of the Great Molasses Flood was never that molasses could kill people. It was how much uncertainty a community had been expected to live beneath before anyone was required to prove the tank was safe. When a company places that kind of risk beside a community, should the public have to prove it was unsafe after it collapses? Or should the company have to prove it is safe before anyone is placed beneath it?